Welcome everybody at our next live streamed panel directly from our hybrid Atelier Düsseldorf Theater der Welt in collaboration with ITI Germany and Theater der Welt Festival. Today we have a panel on festivals, inequality and international collaboration with a select group of speakers coming from all over the world. There's Kirstin Hess, which is a dramaturg at the Junge Schauspielhaus here in Düsseldorf, and who is running the Equity Forum. There's Diane Ragsdale, who is leading the leadership program at Banff in Canada. There's Mike van Graan, who is running the Stand Foundation in South Africa. Jan Linders from Germany, member of ITI board, as well as leading the Stiftung Humboldt in Berlin. And there's Edima Otuokon, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, from the Ladima Foundation in Nigeria. The panel will be facilitated by Vigdis Jakobsdottir from the Reykjavik Arts Festival. So I will hand over now to our first speaker, Diane. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Inga. I'm gonna share my screen now. Hang on just a second. It's great to be here with all of you today. There we go. And can you see this okay? I'm assuming yes, but shout if you cannot. So yes, thank you again for the invitation to be here, zooming in from the Netherlands. I was able to join the opening session plenary, and it was incredibly inspiring. And I was really moved by the conversation. So it's a privilege to be able to share a few thoughts and hear from others today. My sincere thanks as well to my fellow panelists. This session, Festivals, Inequality, and International Collaboration, seems to be aimed at getting at quite a few of today's pressing social, logistical, environmental, and political, technological challenges. Each of the questions that we as panelists were given to consider as we developed our presentations could be the basis for a year-long working group. The questions we are all sitting with these days and the complexities of their interrelationship are awesome in all senses of that word. They produce, in me anyway, feelings of reverence, overwhelm, admiration, and fear. In nearly every arts convening that one attends these days, there seems to be an understanding that as we go forward, we must do so in a more socially and environmentally conscious way, that it will be insufficient simply to survive the past year. We have to emerge better. I've been working lately with a group of international presenters and creative independent producers who have joined themselves under the moniker the International Presenting Commons. They've joined forces to keep international cultural exchange and engagement alive and vibrant in the US now and into the future. And I'm noting that their goals and values map directly onto the topics that are being discussed at this atelier. So it very much feels like we are all resonating around the same challenges and promising possibilities. Just last week at the IPC, we produced an event in which we, let's see here, talked with Carmen Romero in Chile, Faustin Lenicula from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Marni Carmelita in New Zealand. And their conversations surfaced a number of themes that feel resonant to this discussion. Decentering the US, as well as New York and LA within the US. Interdependence, making enduring commitments. Borders, both real and fictional. Equitable exchange, flexibility and fluidity, humility and responsibility, coming together to imagine, improvise, and solve problems, expanding curatorial voices, new collaborations and investments in local artists, deeper engagements with place, including with local indigenous communities, the relationship between art and government and politics, and what it means and what it takes to foster a democratic culture. I would also say that these three individuals and many others are expanding and evolving the concept of festival to address the needs of artists and their communities today. The questions posed to this panel were to a great extent how questions, how to address inequalities with regard to travel and carbon emissions, how to address data and digital access divides in online festivals, how to deal with accessibility and inclusion in physical, digital, and hybrid forms. How questions always make me think of shifts that need to be made at the level of organizing principles. So as I'm no longer in the trenches at a festival and able to give you tactical advice on some of these hows, I thought I would focus on such principles at 4 levels: community relationships, board and governance policies, organizational staffing structure, and self or praxis. So number 1, community relationships. For 22 weeks last fall and winter, I co-led a workshop series called Catalyzing Engagement for a group of 10 cultural institutions in California. The premise of this initiative was that in a year when the core of many institutions, that is, putting on live performances, had been hollowed out, if you will, that now was the perfect time to put engagement at the core of the institution, by which we meant a focus on internal and external relationships and to deep listening within and without. The goal was to foster transformation by allowing these relationships and to focus on how we work to take precedence over products or what we make. Moments of disruption are a great time to unlearn dominant logics, that is, your beliefs, values, goals, processes, principles, and practices. When COVID hit in many arts and cultural institutions, a small group of individuals gathered in a room to determine what would be best for everyone. This is often how change is executed. Many also gave the production of online content, in particular, primacy over relationships to artists and care for communities. However, others made other choices. They listened to community and they adapted as a result. They put relationships to artists and community at their core. I'm interested in what shifts if we do this. Number 2, governance and policies at the board level. I spend a lot of time thinking about the mutually interdependent relationship between economics, aesthetics, and ethics. And one of the concerns I have is that economic values have been crowding out or stretching aesthetic and ethical values. At a sector level, this is quite often because success by funders and others tends to be equated with economic growth. This trickles down to the organizational level, where economics tends to gain considerable attention from the governing board. Most boards have finance and audit committees who debate and discuss the budget, establish targets, and implement policies to ensure the organization is sound financially, both in the present and in the future. On the other hand, how many cultural nonprofits have depth conversations at the board level to come to agreement on what is meant by artistic excellence and how that may be shifting, or what it means to advance social or climate justice goals as a cultural institution? In the US, I think too few. Many arts organizations here establish such values, but give inadequate time for deliberation, debate, and policy setting aimed at interpreting, prioritizing, and figuring out what it is going to take to fully realize such values in practice. Number 3, organizations and structures of decision-making. I was interviewed for a podcast a couple of months ago, and one of the questions I was asked was, what kind of leadership is needed in this moment? I've already alluded to one of these, relational leadership, which is focused on inclusion and ethical behaviors, on process over product, and on imagining the future of relationships and allowing that imagined future to affect our actions in the present. The other two leadership approaches I believe are needed at the moment are an agile mindset and distributed or participatory leadership. Having an agile mindset requires being structured to create and respond in uncertain environments, adapting as you go along. An agile mindset tends to rely, among other things, on small teams and forming networks of collaboration. Distributed or participatory leadership is about sharing power and shifting away from the notion of a singular leader and top-down mode of decision-making. More and more, I am interested in these self-organizing systems, as they're quite often called, and think this is the direction we need to be moving. Finally, number 4, at the level of self, I've been fleshing out ideas lately for what I'm calling a community of inquiry, practice, and care, because the truth is we cannot do this work alone. By inquiry, I mean a space to consider collectively the problems and opportunities facing the sector and collectively imagine possible pathways into the future. By practice, I mean a space to learn together what it means and what it takes from a practical standpoint to respond to this moment and be a culture change agent. And by care, I mean a space to provide mutual support and encouragement, a space grounded in love and well-being. And certainly it seems this is very much at the heart of what you are doing in these weeks together. I was inspired along this line of thinking by the writing of Michael Jones, who wrote the book Artful Leadership, and this passage in particular here on the screen. To cross the threshold into the era ahead, we will all need to create opportunities for these new kinds of informal, peer-to-peer, generative learning spaces, where new higher level learning comes to us through the shared processes of exploring, inquiring, and imagining together, end quote. Moreover, arising out of such communities, I believe we need laboratories in which to incubate and experiment, undertake collective research, share our successes and failures, and form movements to shift the systems, to take action together. So to summarize, how do we realize the better future to which we aspire? 1, put relationship to the communities for whom you exist to create value rather than products at the core of your institution. Number 2, make sure your board is paying attention to more than the bottom line. Engage in debate and discussion and create policies and principles that will hold your feet to the fire in terms of shifting aesthetic and ethical or social values. Number 3, a system is resilient in relationship to how decentralized it is. Shift and share power, work in small, agile teams, and create networks. And 4, create and join communities of practice, inquiry, and care, where you can come together to ask questions, identify problems, imagine solutions, share successes and failures, and support one another. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk and very clear thinking. It gives us a lot of stepping stones to continue the dialogue, I believe. Number 2, sorry, I had to grab my book here. Speaker number 2 is Jan Linders, who is from Berlin, Germany, and he is a member of the ITI board, and he is here in person, so I invite you to the stage.
So, hello everyone here and here. It's actually my first hybrid attempt of speaking after 1.5 years of Zoom conferences. I hope I'll stick with the time and the format. I'm here to listen, to learn, and maybe to share ideas. Already I heard lots of buzzwords that could be very useful for our practice. I'm going to tell you about something that hasn't started yet, so I'm here more with questions than with recipes. My institution is not a museum and it's not a theater, it's something in between yet to be invented. It's in the middle of Berlin, it's a reconstructed castle, 4 stakeholders, a university, Humboldt University, Berlin City Museum, the foundation I work for, that's for the building and for the program, and there is, and that's maybe the hot topic you may all have heard about, it's ethnological and Asian art collections, highly contested. Among them 400 Benin bronzes, among them a boat from Polynesia that was, let's say, stolen by the German army. All these things pop up in the last 5 years. And when the place was invented, it was a great idea to bring non-European cultures to the middle of Berlin and balance out this reconstructing a Prussian castle in the 21st century. But now we have a double challenge, let's say. So it's a first place in my life where I don't have to think of any ideas or any topics to work about because these topics are so close and so clear. I'll make it really short. The photos you will see are all taken before the opening, and we won't really go into the rooms. We have 40,000 square meters and we'll open them step by step. We have 3 performance halls that may be of interest to you. I put the measurements there, and we have courtyards. You will see photos of the courtyards. We are, and that's why I'm happy to be invited, we are not a festival, but we in a way have a permanent festival structure, because other than most German theaters, we don't have an ensemble, and also we don't really are a receiving house with a lot of equipment to receive, but we have always to reinvent ourselves. So I think we very often come up with festival terms. In April of this year, we opened the courtyards. In July, we'll open the first exhibitions, and the ethnological artifacts will be on display from September 21 on, and then going over to summer 22. So we have a year of openings. Yes, what I did was I just wrote down the 8 questions that were sent to me, and I'll try to give some thoughts, not answers. And illustrate them, not randomly, but a little bit with some images I took with my own little iPhone camera. Which role can festivals play in reducing inequality, enhancing fair international collaboration? I won't tell you what doesn't work with my institution in Germany. I just tell you what the options are or should be. Inequality will be the big topic, I think, of the next 10, 20 years, and it will go into the discussion of arts, not only arts exchange, but arts production. We call it, in our house, we want to work with colonialism, but that's historical, sometimes still ongoing, but also coloniality, and that is the ongoing structures that shape economics, that shape ethics, that shape our view of the world, universalism, Western universalism, and of course it shapes art production. The Western models of, you know, who is your director, whom can I talk to, who is the production manager, who is the leader of the festival, the curator, even if it's a collective. All these structures need to be, I think, questioned. And inequality, of course, means how can we share, how can we transfer resources? And that's very difficult under many tax laws. Even collaborations are, as you know, difficult to manage. This, by the way, is an inside of one of our spaces with a small stage. It's an attempt in a multi-purpose room to create a little stage. What do travel restrictions do to festival programming? Okay, we haven't started yet, but of course we lost a year, like many of us, many of you, in networking and establishing contact. That's why I'm very happy I see you, and I see you here, and I invite you to stay in touch with me through the email, through the list. I'm on the list, and people who are logged in from outside, please note down my email address coming up at the end again. Without travel, I think there cannot be real networking. What we can do is live off the context we before had, so we really have all to work on re-establishing travel. That's why I'm very happy that Theater der Welt is taking place, not only for the artists, but also for the networking opportunities. And of course, we have to especially put a focus on the Global South, and I'm very happy to be here in person and meet many artists from the Global South. And I hope that all of you could travel soon and we can meet soon in person, or I could come to you. How may we address inequalities with regard to travel, carbon emissions, etc.? This, by the way, is a dance project in our big foyer, a little tryout. I met a man from the French Cultural Institute lately, and he came with a stunning proposal. He said, I used COVID to acquire a professional sailing license. So he offered to kind of set up a network of sailboats going back and forth between crossing the Atlantic and also the Pacific, and bringing artists across, and also, of course, joining artists or bringing artists together on these boats. And so it would be kind of a boat residency. Maybe the off-product could be to learn to sail. It's a realistic proposal. I think he really wants to do it. And as you all know, Greta Thunberg made the trip across the Atlantic twice. So why don't we do it? The only issue is time and, of course, money, because it's more costly and much more time consuming to sail across. But I think we should give this idea a try. If you are interested in this, I'll get you in touch with my colleague from the French embassy in Berlin. And he is going to step out there. He wants to do something new. So he really is into sailing. Of course, sailing is a universal cultural practice, but it was used in colonialism. Of course, the first colonizers came by sailboat. Maybe it's interesting to turn around this way of traveling. How may international collaborations continue in a time of COVID and climate change? Well, COVID, I think we can only hope that vaccination programs reach the whole world, and we have to press that culture is important, and we can all take precautions, but don't give up. Climate change, I think, is a much bigger question, and I think we have to lobby that we don't, we still have funds for travel, and not only for, let's say that people say, well, it was great to have these Zoom performances, and let's keep it that way. But it's a very, very simple answer, but I think climate change and art is not a contradiction, but of course it's something that needs always to be discussed and be made transparent. So why not make the carbon footprint transparent in festivals? A lot of networking has to be done, less ego in festivals, more sharing of artists. I mean, I know it's already happening, but especially when there are, let's say, quarantine restrictions and so on, if an artist goes to a continent, then festivals should join and should be as agile, as we heard it yesterday, to accommodate artists from other festivals. How to ensure that national and cultural chauvinism are not enhanced, promoted by travel restrictions? Well, national chauvinism, I think, is a much bigger picture than travel restrictions. I think chauvinism and new nationalism and new identity politics, as in new essentialism, is very difficult. In my museum/performance space, we will work with what we call source communities. It's an ethnological term. We will work with people who were at the source of origin of objects that were brought to European museums. And the big question is, do they have the authority to speak? Yes, of course, but is this the only authority? What authority do Western scientists have? And what authority do people with double biographies, super diverse people, have to speak? So I think what we just heard, it's very important to work also with local communities. local communities and source communities. And it doesn't really answer the question, but what I want to say, the picture has to be seen much bigger, that we really no essentialism, no national flags, no, I mean, still we have it here, it's an Africa focus, Africa is not a country. It's, well, I just heard yesterday in a radio announcement about this festival and so on. So how can we take into account that there are more and more people with 2, 3 passports, super diverse artists, and working in a transcultural field. Online festivals, how to address the divides. Yeah, there are divides. I think we will go on, and I really, there were some days we all remember we enjoyed hopping from one festival to the other, digitally in the morning in an Australian festival, midday in some festival in South Africa, and in the evening South America. I had 2-3 days like that. That were very exciting, and meeting friends over that were in other parts of the world and being joined at the same festival. So let's keep the lessons we learned, but the divides are there, and physical presence cannot be replaced, I think. It may sound old-fashioned. By the way, this is an image of a film we commissioned for the facade, and this is not a film to be streamed because the image is 60 meters wide by 20 meters high, and this can only be, it can't be even captured on camera, on a normal camera. There are things that have to be seen, even if it's film. Yeah? I just come from Berlinale. Yeah, I have to rush. 2 more questions. Which role can festivals play in reducing inequality? I think, yes, festivals are very, very important. I don't have to tell you, and I just say the role is very, very important, and festival means fluidity of structures, but festivals also need to have a very diverse audience. And this is something, for example, this festival I'm afraid has to work on. And it's very tough, but we have to see it. And accessibility and inclusion, how do we deal with these topics in the physical, digital, and hybrid formats? Racial equality, gender equity, and so on. These are all, that's what we all try, and it's very, very hard, and we have to say to the activists, please be patient, we are on the way. For example, in my team, I have at least 1 person of color, we have 2 queer persons, and so on, but of course that's not enough, and we have to really go into affirmative action. Solidarity means only we have to take all the money we do have in the global north and really try to transfer as much as possible to festivals and into collaborations in the global south. Yes, please get in touch and visit. This is another image. These are BIPOC people from Berlin reenacting protests in Toronto and seen on a facade in a Prussian building. I think this can at least be a start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. Next up, we have our very own Mike van Graan from South Africa, who's very much involved in the Festival Academy, of course. He's also a renowned playwright and a project manager for Stand Festival. Mike.
Thanks very much, Victus, and thank you for playing this role. It's really different, not having to concentrate on what other people are saying. So South Africa, the country in which I live, is one of the most unequal societies in the world. In fact, as recently as 2019, the World Bank rated it as the most unequal society. The top 20% in our country earns 70% of the national income. The bottom 40% have to make do with just 7% of national income between them. This atelier started on the 16th of June. It was a public holiday in South Africa, Youth Day, commemorating the uprisings by young people against the imposition of Afrikaans as a language of instruction in 1976, and more broadly, as a mass uprising against apartheid. Yet today, in a country that should be working for them, youth aged 15 to 24 are the most vulnerable in the labor market, with 63% in this category being unemployed. As with the colonial project that continues to enrich mostly white nations, so the economic and social structures that we've inherited from the apartheid era have continued to privilege primarily those who were structurally designed to benefit from racist, exploitative laws. So that the average white male CEO, for example, earns the same as 461 Black women in the bottom 10% of income earners. We live in the same country, governed by the same constitution that grants all of us the same fundamental human rights and freedoms. And yet, we live in parallel worlds. Notwithstanding our constitution, a child born in a South African township does not, in practice, have the same rights and freedoms as a child born in a suburb. The rich are able to buy the best education, buy private healthcare, buy private transport, and even buy private security, burglar alarms, electric fences, armed response. The vast majority are cursed to mostly poor public health care, inefficient public transport, ineffective police services, with 56% of us surviving on 134 euros per month. South Africa is a metaphor for the world. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, declares Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And yet we know this not to be true. A child born in South Sudan does not have the same rights and dignity as a child born in France. Not that long ago, Africans were taken by force from the continent, enslaved as cheap labor, on the back of which white wealth was built. Today, Africans wish to travel and sell their labor voluntarily on the international market are treated with indignity, abuse, suspicion at entry points. Their passports permitting them to travel without a visa to less than half the countries permitted to a European passport holder. This is the world structurally and concretely inequitable in which we make art, in which we stage festivals. To what end? For whom? Our National Arts Festival takes place each non-COVID year in a university town now called Makanda. It has been going for 45 years, founded at the height of apartheid to celebrate English imported by British colonial settlers. But the levels of poverty and unemployment in that town are among the highest in the country. Once the festival is done with its 10 days of amazing, as per its byline, it is the private guest houses, the white-owned restaurants, the private schools, and the university who have benefited most, while unemployment and poverty continue to be the 365 days of unamazing for many of the town's citizens. The global and national context of inequality in which we make festivals are real. So the questions are, what is the role and the responsibility of festivals in addressing inequality? Is that even a fair burden to place on an arts festival when the structures of inequality are both brought about and maintained by forces much greater than a festival, and when other sectors far more resourced and engaged in more sustained action have generally failed to shift the indicators of poverty, unemployment, and inequality? And thirdly, would the interventions by festivals not simply be politically correct box ticking, conscience solving and patronizing actions that provide the cover under which festivals may continue to do what they do best, which is to serve those with disposable income? The colonial project continues to be manifest in who has political power. 5 countries have the right of veto at the United Nations Security Council. In who has cultural power. Most of us in the global South continue to consume movies and news from abroad, having us internalize their perspectives, their ideas, their values? Who has economic power, the use of market access, of economic blockades, of sanctions to impose particular courses of action? Who has military power? While we are rightly concerned about the future impact of climate change, we have forgotten that 9 countries have nuclear weapons that could eliminate humankind and destroy the planet this afternoon. We guarantee our future by the threat of having it eliminated. What a foolish species we are. Festivals do not exist in a vacuum. They are sites of cultural diplomacy, means of conveying ideas and meaning that serve the interests of some. But they are also places for contestation. International cultural collaborations are textured by power relations related to who funds the collaboration, who determines the aesthetic form, who has the right to travel, whose internet is stable, whose gender politics will prevail, who has been vaccinated, who has the political space to do the work, whose language will be used in the collaboration. In moving forward, we can choose the burden of awareness, the bliss of ignorance, or the cynicism of denial. For those who choose awareness, which brings with it the burden of changing our world, I'd like to invite you to make peace with the following paradoxes. The comfort of being constantly disturbed. The answers that lie in questioning. The loneliness that comes with solidarity. And the authenticity of Gramsci's pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. The pessimism that comes with our ability to think, to interrogate, to understand, and the optimism of our hearts, our capacity to feel, to empathize, and to hope, and then to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for putting us, for taking the big picture. It's really moving. Thank you. Next up is Kirstin Hess. She's from Germany. She's actually from the theater just down the road from here, the Düsseldorf Schauspielhaus, the house, from the young theater department, the dramaturg there. Welcome, Kirstin.
Yes, thanks for inviting me to have a talk. Actually, I think after having heard Mike, we have heard everything that we need to hear, but I want to emphasize on a point that I'm coming from, being a part of the D House, especially of the Department of Young Playhouse, focusing on theater for young children. A few days ago in Germany, the parliament decided on taking the UN children's rights into our constitution, but this try failed because we need 2/3 of the members of parliament to change our constitution. So people for tens of years worked to do this, and the government that's now in duty, when they were voted 4 years ago, they put it in their coalition contract that they want to do this. Now we are short after these 4 years. In September we have new elections, and this try failed. And why did it fail? We don't know yet, but of course there are guesses. And it's interesting that children seem to be so fearful to adults that adults cannot take their rights into the constitution. Of course there's good reasons saying that the constitution is for every human in our country, so children are humans as well. But still, in Germany we have about 20% of our population being underage. But we do not have, coming to the cultural sector, 20% of the money for culture for young audiences. We're far away from that. So coming to our issue that we talk in these ateliers, I think, and also I prepare with Mike for the end of next week in part of the festival Theater der Welt, the Equity Forum for International Cooperation. I want to give an insight what we try in this little 3-day field. We gave from the festival money to 3 young artists in Cameroon, in Nigeria, and in South Africa. And we tried to just transfer the money by not wishing anything, because as you know, the problem is that there's no access to funds all over the world, but especially in the northern and more rich countries. And usually then you have to do something because the fund wants it or the partner. And I am one of these northern partners in international corporations, has also their needs. So it's really difficult to come on an eye height level when you work together. So I want to give you an insight what David Kono, or let's say David Kono from Cameroon tries to do. He's working on a wooden Moliere, finding parents in the wood, having a lifeless child in their arms, and he asked what is their wish going to be? The wish, a life between hope, desire, but also expectations. And does anyone in the world see that there are expectations in countries that might not have the same financial power? This seems to be an easy, stupid question, but for the people in this production, it's really very honest. Then Jade Bowes from South Africa put a fairy tale from the Brothers Grimm on stage, but what she does is connect it with all the tales we have in all of the nations of our world, and changes it to the question of who's on stage, the representation question, and also about family situations that are not ideal, just having heard Mike van Graan from the country Jade Bowes is from as well, knowing that there is children, I think Mike just mentioned it, that also grow up without parents, and how could they make a living in future, not having any support. Then we come to the Nigerian project. They worked on the question of skin, and this makes so clear how still Europe gives is a regulation issue for the own living in Nigeria, because in Nigeria the big issue is, which the young artists now try to change, and it's a pretty new issue. They told me that body shaming and colorism leads to the darker you are, the more you're considered to be stupid among each other. And so this generation really tries to work on also accepting their own university degrees, accepting what they can do in their own country. And what we try to do in this equity forum, coming from the Theatre for Young Audiences, is going to the question of art and how can we collaborate, also in a sustainable way, where Baby Schwarisch from Chile introduces a project that she will really launch in August, the Capilla Platform and Production Network for the South American artists, trying, when they have access to a European festival, to really connect it with other festivals, so they can also travel in a more sustainable way in a social, but also in a climate question field. So what we also try to work on, also among ASITISH, which is the worldwide group of theatre for young audiences makers, is to think of how can we create an international fund that gets access to everyone, not only to the money-giving institutions or countries, which is still a dream. There is something like that in the UN, but it's really complicated and high bureaucracy effort you have to make to get access to that, and then it's really not enough money that you get to realize a work. So the question also I think Jan put on is how can we share powers but also financial issues, and how can we really start to listen, to understand also our privileges, talking about me and others like me, and then also try to become good allies in this question of equity in the international context. So I think these ateliers are a good point to work on, and we hope that we go on in the Equity Forum and of course after that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirstin. Last but not least, thank you very much. Edima Otuokon, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from Nigeria. She is an executive director of Edima Foundation, which is fighting for more equity or they're trying to combat inequality when it comes to the TV, movie, and the content industry in Africa. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you all for inviting Edima to be a part of this conversation and to share our thoughts as to the way forward. And I'd really like to thank all the speakers that came before me, especially Mike. And I'm going to stand on something you said, the optimism to hope and act. So that is what we will be speaking to as Edima Foundation, because we are at a point where we must act and we must garner as much support as possible to ensure, equality, especially within the TV, film, and content industry in Africa. So to start off, I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So African women have stories to tell. Let's watch them. And I'm just going to give a brief story about something that happened about 2 years ago. I was invited to the International Women's Film Festival, Dortmund, Cologne, to be an international jury member. And whilst there, I watched an amazing documentary made by a Kenyan filmmaker, and it was called In Search Of. This was a young lady who had gone through genital mutilation, and she had documented her road to trying to, reconstruct her clitoris. And I wondered to myself, why would we have, this film here? And it was made in 2016, 2017. Why didn't it do, the circuits in Africa? Why was it that I had to travel all the way to Germany to watch a film that spoke to a lot of issues in Africa? And it became very clear when I spoke to the lady, and she said she had sent her films, to the African festival circuit. And at no point did anybody ever acknowledge or even say that her film could, met any criteria, whatever. And this was one of the reasons why it was so necessary for us as Edima to set up, structures, systems, processes that ensure that we move women from the margins, and not just women filmmakers from the margin, but in doing that, because they focus on stories that speak to social, cultural issues, it also means that we're moving other women from the margins. So we must take those steps towards closing the gender gap and redefining the role of women in society, and especially within the film industry. To address political, social, and economic inequality, women must be empowered and included at all levels of decision-making and all levels of the value chain in filmmaking. Our approach must be intentional to guarantee equity. We must look at the socialization process, our cultural practices, the education system, and prioritize capacity building, mentoring to address the gender gaps at leadership, policy, and operational levels. At operational levels, we must put in place capacity building and training support to enhance technical skills and competence of women to better influence the environment with confidence. At the policy level, we should address research gaps in the field of gender and support increased contributions to women, to policy-based research activities, and to advance gender perspectives and mainstream the significance of women in film, TV, and content, as well as in leadership, politics, and the economy. That being said, at Edima, we believe in the power stories, to change and influence culture. We see that, pop culture relatively all the time, has an influence on the way we think, the way we look. And since many films produced in Africa tend to portray women in stereotypical and negative matters, we at Edima have made it an intentional, intervention to ensure that at pre-production, production, and post-production, as well as marketing and distribution stages, we create interventions that begin to include women. So just a little bit about us. Our aim is to support and develop women in the film industry across Africa and to correct the major imbalances within the African filmmaking industry. We believe in capacity building, partnerships, mentorship, and live on these 5 pillars of ensuring recognition and collaboration. Edima interventions are all aimed at bringing women, from the margins into mainstream. And this is why I'm going to talk about the Film Festival Network. So in 2018, we started a project called the Women's Film Festival Program. And this was essentially based on ensuring equity and ensuring that more women's films could be seen so that more voices could be heard and different narratives approached. And in doing that, we realized that a lot of these women's film festivals needed, support to ensure sustainability, needed support to ensure that they could market and create an audience. And we did go ahead to do that, but we had to shift our thinking and we had to realize that as much as we wanted to just focus on women's film festivals, there was a broader problem, a structural problem within, the film festival, circuit and I'm speaking, specifically to Africa, to the countries that we had worked in and the film festivals that Edima had participated in. And we realized that we were being very myopic in our view at only focusing on women's film festivals, and knew that for us to be able to make any impact, we needed to look at film festivals as a whole. So film festivals that catered to everyone and ensure that we're able to educate people as to how women must be brought and must be respected within that space. And we needed to also ensure that we could, replace that trust. There was a trust deficit with women and submitting films to film festivals. So we created the Film Festival Program. So at the Film Festival Program, our aim is to increase gender diversity in festival leadership and management to support better planned and managed film festivals in Africa. Through residency trainings, we build a community of sustainable film festivals that are transparent and provide better opportunities for female filmmakers. Now, this is really necessary because we need to understand that within the different regions in Africa, when women make films and submit these films, sometimes they have to pay fees. And a lot of women filmmakers have come back to us to say, we paid the fees, we don't even know if our films were, if anybody even watched them. Nobody has given us any feedback. So there needs to be transparency in the selection process, especially if people are, paying to submit films, to film festivals. There also needs to be transparency and, inclusion in the people that are selected to be jury members, because the way one person sees a film is totally different from the way a woman would, address or look at a film. So there needs to be quite a bit of transparency around that. We also need to understand that festivals, are a place, where a lot of women, and can, they can engage with community. And so film festivals are so significant in ensuring that not only do you get your film screened and that, community and purpose, but you get to share, with your peers, and you get to network, you get to learn, opportunities avail. And that is why it needs to be, an inclusive process for women, as, sending their films in, ensuring that it's transparent, ensuring that they actually do get watched, ensuring that it's a level playing ground. I know that it's a lot to ask, but I'm going to stand on optimism and I'm going to hope as we act towards this. And this is, my last picture. And why I'm putting this is, this makes us at Ledima every single day proud, because our film festival program led to this young lady, Cornelia Gleles, setting up her film festival, Fifth Cotonou, her first edition, I believe, and quite a number of us agree, was one of the best film festivals held in Africa in 2019. And so when you, intentionally support filmmakers, you find, that women are able to exceed above and beyond, what anybody could ever dream of. So I think for us at Ledima Foundation, it is, for there to be inclusivity, we really need to look at policies. Before COVID, we already had issues of travel restriction. Understand that creatives across Africa, and especially women, do not have the kind of bank accounts required by embassies or countries to allow for visas to be given. Creatives live more often than not from hand to mouth. And so to say that they must have a balance in their account that allows for them to receive a visa to go for festivals is already excluding a majority of people, from the festival. So before COVID and before the travel vaccines, vaccine passports and all that we're all talking about now, this issue existed. So how do we resolve that and begin to resolve the issues around, vaccination and equity in even receiving vaccinations so that you can actually travel the world? These are things that we need to talk about, and these are things that we need to act on at policy levels, at government levels, because just like Mike said, to hold festivals, accountable to that is literally, akin to saying that, they can change, the entire world. But we can have a voice that can, literally, if all of us come together and come together in a collaborative manner, come together with respect, come together understanding that everyone should be included. I believe that we can make a change and we can begin to include those that have been excluded. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edima. Thank you very much for your passionate words. It's been really interesting to listen to these diverse speakers from different parts in the world. And I have to say there are recurring themes in what you're talking, although we go from the very wide and the big picture to very specific challenges in our work. And the role, and I'm what Mike asked about, is it fair to put the demands on festivals to really change the world and change how things operate? And it's a big question, but I would like to begin with also Diane's first speech, or first presentation really gave us I feel we got the stepping stones there that have been repeated throughout. We're thinking from the very wide picture, from community to the self, and responsibility for each step, for each layer. There are levels of responsibility, right? So maybe we can start by, Diana spoke about relationships in this sense, and deep engagements with communities, and relationships with artists, relationships with our audiences. Do you find, is it, wherever you are in your work, you all have different roles in your work, do you find that this is something that you can really work on a daily basis, or do you need others to join in with you? Does this need to be like a joint force, or can an individual really start a revolution? I know what I think about this, but I maybe throw it out there as quite an open question, whether this responsibility of the self, whether it can go from grassroots or up, or whether we really need to start at the political community level. Does that make sense, that question? Anyone can grab the mic here.
I'd love to hear what Mike has to say.
Yes. Well, he spoke about hope.
Yeah, and Mike would like to listen to what the others have to say. But I mean, it kind of, the question, Victor, is interesting, because in a way it kind of resonates with one of my closing lines about the loneliness of solidarity. You know, it kind of goes directly to what you're saying, because I spend a lot of my time kind of as an activist in a way, trying to change things, not just in our world, more kind of socially, but also even within our own arts community in South Africa, where, you know, one keeps on trying to say to artists, the only way in which we're going to change what it is that we experience at a micro level is if we come together to change things at a macro level. We need a collective voice, we need organizations. And artists are so concerned about putting food on the table, paying the rent at the end of the month, that they don't see that the struggles at a micro level are impacted upon by macro policies and funding strategies that are not sympathetic to their conditions. And yet they fail to come together, you know, unless there's a real crisis, and they come together for a particular moment and then they dissipate again. And so in a way, that's what I'm kind of reflecting on about the loneliness of solidarity. And if you then take that into a regional level, you know, within the continent and globally, and goes back to what Diane was saying, that the only way in which things can really change within the world is if we do take this multilateral approach, if we do come together, if we do stand in solidarity with each other. And this is kind of what the Atelier has been trying to encourage over the last few years that I've been part of it, certainly. And I think, though, that, you know, once they're done, you kind of feel like, gee, you know, where are we now? Where is this network? What are we doing? You know, and then we go to the next one and so on. And I just think that there needs to be some much more sustained and consistent action around this. We need to keep in conversation and dialogue with each other, and we need to act, because that is also where we get our enthusiasm, our hope, our feeling that, you know, things can change. It's from each other. But as soon as we are atomized, and, you know, the whole strategy of the colonial project is about divide and rule. That's how you maintain your power, right? So we need to counter that by coming together in order to change what it is we believe to be wrong. Sorry, long answer to your question, but there we go.
Thank you, thank you. Diane, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, that was brilliant. And I really agree with a lot of what was said. The other thing I would add, just in terms of on a very practical level, like this, how and when does this work happen when so many are, you know, on a kind of treadmill in terms of the way, the pace of work, the way that work must happen, et cetera. You know, this past year, one of the gifts, if, you know, if we can call anything a gift this past year, was the I think the suspension of live performances where that happened gave us a moment to say, okay, before we just shift towards content creation and online, is there something else we could do with this time? And that 22-week workshop that I talked about, and the work I did at the Banff Center, for instance, was all about that relationship building. It was basically a hibernation in producing for a bit of time to focus on those relationships. And that can't happen all that often. And in a way, I think when these periods arrive, if we can use them to literally begin to practice what that feels like, how does it change how we work, what we expect of ourselves, the amount of content we expect to produce. You know, Shannon Litzenberger, who's also speaking at this conference later today and with whom I work at Banff, has said before, you know, we have to grapple with the fact that we're going to have to slow down, for instance, and do less if we want well-being and care for relationships and things like that to be centered. And so I also think we do need moments carved out, like this kind of event that we're at right now and others, to practice what it feels like to be in process and to allow that to lead over product. It's not natural, I think, for people in the arts. We're so attuned to creating excellent products, right? So it needs to be attended to. But yeah, brilliant answer, Mike.
Thank you. And maybe by giving more time, we can actually also save on resources and make these more meaningful, or make our relationships more meaningful across continents and across disciplines as well. But I'm curious to hear from the speakers who are here in the room, from your perspectives as from Germany, because I very often, when I sit in on these discussions, I think about the responsibility of being from the privileged European context, and I'm feeling sometimes that it's so hard to know where to start to really try. How can I be this trusted ally that Kirstin spoke about? How can I do it in an ethical and the right way, if you like? And so I'm curious to hear, maybe you elaborate on that a little bit. Do you want to start, Jan?
Now it's on. Yes. Okay. Thank you. I got it. Yeah. Just very short. I'll try. I think we are on a way, and we are on a very good way, because I'm hearing more and more the word privilege. I'm hearing more and more the word awareness and all the other buzzwords we have been listening to. Thank you all for your contributions. One step would be to not to be alone in fighting, would be to put it in the DNA of our organizations. Work on a mission statement. For example, we haven't even started, we have a mission statement, we haven't opened, but we have a very bold goal in there now, which I'm reminded every day, namely decolonize in practice, and decolonize practice and knowledge as a big headline. And this is, of course, a big container that needs to be filled little by little with action. And it goes into contract writing, it goes into technology, it goes into, of course, programming, sharing, and so on. And this, but by putting it in a headline or in a mission statement that is even public, we can always be reminded. And I think the most important thing is not to give up because the task is so big, but also make allies with activists. There are more and more activists around, and we are arts activists, and art is activism. And if we have this, if we come together and have these goals, we can also, and this is my second point, and that's it for now, is to also take along the, let's say, the middle of the society. Each society in our country is represented here, of course, is different, but from my experience, art is something for the somewhat privileged already, and it shouldn't be. So we have to reach out, but also the privileged people who come, nevertheless, should be part of this awareness, because it's a comfort zone to sit in a well-climatized theater space, enjoy a festival, but we can't step back. We have to move forward all together, but it can't be, activism can't be at the forefront, and then there has to be a big gap, because of we are witnessing relapses. We are witnessing people who say, stop that gender talk, stop that equality. After COVID, Europe may center on European activities again and forget reaching out to other continents because it's too far away, too dangerous, too costly, too impossible. And I think this is very important, that we have the whole society, or that the people who are probably not even knowing about these questions, making them aware that they have privileges and they can share privileges and work on their privileges. Thank you.
Kirstin, did you want to add something? Sorry, I'm trying to be...
I would love to. I mean, I'm also a member of the D House, and I don't know how far this message came, but within Germany, we are very much looked on because we had a really serious issue of racism in our house, and it came up in spring that it came to be public. So the good question is how to become a good ally in international contexts where we don't manage within Germany or within our theater scene. It's really a big issue that we still have to work on. And I would not so much agree that we are good with Jan in doing these mission statements, because we all do, but then the question is what then? So the thing is, I'm still learning is to become a good ally also means to listen, to understand, which is, I think we are not there yet in our German society. But then after that, the third step comes, which would mean to change my habit. And yes, it's also an individual question, but of course we need the political structures, as Mike pointed out too. But then at the same time, after having done, so now I do a big jump, to also have a very short statement only. When we have a political structure, I always notice that all people that want to change things take themselves again back home to their sofa situation. So it's also important to stay connected to the activist part and really begleiten, go along with the process and stick to the process, ask questions to the policymakers, and invite them also to all of your festivals. And yeah, it's a travel issue also, of course. And how can we really meet and learn from each other to change ourselves and to share the powers? I think everything is said this morning already, which I could only say again, which is important in the field.
Thank you. Maybe Edima wants to address this from an African perspective.
Thank you. So, yes, I mean, for us at Edima, one of the things we try to do is, when we have sessions, it's not just focusing on just talking and saying this. We try as much as possible to take whatever we say into intervention, so that we don't all just leave and walk away. And I'll tell you, from a lot of our discussions around, ensuring equity and equality and bringing in policy and bringing in, government, and the different structures that we've talked about. We've created interventions that sustain what we're saying and keep us going. So I'll give you an example. After a discussion in Zanzibar during Discord, we had the Women of Influence panel session. And women kept saying, well, I want to work with women. I want to improve how women, within the film and content and TV industry are perceived on the amount of work they get. But the problem is I can't find women. And so what we did was, from that conversation, a suggestion was made to create what we call the A-list. And the A-list is a database of women across Africa, whether, in every, stream of, filmmaking, whether it's directing, producing, cinematography. And so you can go and you can click. So these are little interventions that now begin to change things. Immediately after that, we decided, okay, beyond just having just this, where you can find women, let's take it a step further and create a community so that we can begin to speak and we can begin to mobilize and we can begin to advocate within our different countries. And now every single time we continue to add more and more categories to this. So for instance, women in film who are policymakers and now part and parcel of this A-list, so that they can begin to see what is really happening. Because, at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. So I think it is really critical, and maybe a learning from us to this, session is, we don't just leave, with, oh, well, we said some brilliant things and we know ourselves and things, but let's find something, post this conversation, whether it's at the round table, whether it's even after the festival is over. How do we all begin to interact so that all the questions that that were given to us to facilitate this conversation are things that we start small steps, but we begin to do. So let's act, like Mike said, rather than we discuss and walk away. So I think talk to interventions must be what we should be focused on as we leave here, so that we don't come here next year and the year after speaking about the same things that we spoke about today, because that is always the problem that we tend to find with having panels and having sessions. What we should be able to do this time next year is to say, this is what we achieved within the space of a year, working together as a collective, because we are a collective now. The fact that we're all sitting in this room, and the fact that we're all listening to ourselves and we're identifying the issues, we are the ones that can begin little by little, start making the changes that are required for this, this world we want to see, especially around gender. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe also you talk about community building, and I think it is such an important thing, and that communities are also diverse, that they are not just like theater communities with only theater practitioners inside, but they need policymakers and the periphery of and other art forms inside as well to really make a change, probably. But also you have chosen a path which is really powerful also, is you identify a challenge, you identify a real issue in your area, and you decide to attack it and use different methods and build a community around it. And I think that's also a really strong method or strong way to really move forward, being specific as well as seeing the big picture. We have some questions in the chat. I'm trying to navigate following everything, but there's a really long question that I think I can summarize, and I hope I do it justice, by Nathan Wanika. And she's talking about, she's going back to the social responsibility and of festivals, and she the last bit of the question is, I'm failing to identify the limitations between our roles and say the role of government is this, and she's referring to the role of festivals to decide and to be political, and if I understand this correctly, maybe I should read it actually, to do it justice. I will do that. I understand the social responsibility we have as individuals in terms of addressing inequality and being as inclusive as possible. But for festivals and for context's sake, in Malawi, ticket prices highly affect the audience in terms of economic backgrounds. In fact, the prices will be higher to exclude the poor citing that on average, the crowds is more unruly. Yeah, so the tickets price is used to keep away the unruly crowd, if I understand it correctly. The region in which you hold said festivals may also exclude others because of deeply rooted tribalism. These are the issues within society itself, and how can festival organizers overcome that without re-educating the masses? Does it become our responsibility to include sensitization messages during our events or through our event marketing? Do we tailor festivals to address these matters specifically, keeping in mind that, for example, if a Pride festival was to be held in Malawi, we would actually be putting any attendees in danger? So the question is it really our responsibility to educate the masses as well as providing them with interesting and challenging material? Any thoughts from the speakers on this?
I'll invite Edima to go first, and then I'll go after. Since we're both from this continent,
My goodness, I'm trying to, figure out in my mind how to address this, and to, address it in a way that speaks to, or can maybe give some. Yeah, so on the continent, I do agree that some festivals are used to, there's certain things that festivals put in place to exclude. But majority of the festivals I have been involved in really haven't excluded. In fact, there's been a lot of community engagement, because a festival can only thrive and survive when the community within which it is, it is placed in or it's located in is, part and parcel of that. So, I'll give you an example of the Zanzibar International Film Festival. You do have a lot of community engagement. It's free to all, to all the citizens of Tanzania and East Africa. It's only, international participants that pay to be a part of it. But when it does come to issues around being queer or being gay, it is an issue that is it's a big issue in Africa, because a lot of our laws are against this. And so when you do hold a festival, sort of like what the speaker, the participant asked about, having like a pride festival or something, you are putting people at risk. And what really needs to happen is, once again, at policy level, beginning to educate people about inclusivity. And you will begin to get that change. It'll be slow, but it's not just something that festivals can tackle on their own, because these are deep-rooted, sentiments that need a reorientation of mind and need a re-socialization of, the people who are at leadership at this point, to understand that this is not, something that you should be scared of. And I think as time goes on, if we approach this from different segments, so from, political, from an economic, from a social, from even a religious, because it's also, especially in Africa, religion is also what is pushing the fear of, people's differences. So how we can begin to, change ideologies, we need to do it step by step. And it's starting with a conversation. It's starting with a conversation. I don't know if I've handled this well enough, but
thank you.
it's a difficult question.
It is a big question, isn't it? Mike, did you have something? Or
yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it's not just one question, it's a whole range of different questions.
Yes.
So maybe just to try to pick up on some of the points. I think the first thing about, the unruly poor, I guess it goes to who are we making festivals for? If we are serious about Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that states everyone shall have the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community and to enjoy the arts, then I think we need to accept that everyone has that right. And obviously we can choose who to make our festivals for. But if we, say in our particular context in South Africa, decide that actually our festivals are for those with disposable income, as I referenced earlier, that means that, 60% of our people will be denied their fundamental human right to access the arts. Because if people do not have the resources in terms of current kind of contemporary cultural policy that is so premised on the notion of creative industries, which is all about the markets, like Diane was saying in her presentation as well, that we've, given preeminence to what has value in the market to decide what actually has value in our festivals as well. And the irony in our particular context is that government policy is kind of premised on this notion of creative industries, with the idea of creative industries contributing to the economy so that we have the resources to undertake the social and human development that is necessary because of our triple challenges of unemployment and inequality and poverty. But the very emphasis, ironically, on the creative industries in that kind of way, on those forms that have value in the marketplace, by definition excludes the people who don't have the resources to be able to participate in what is supposed to, benefit them. So it's this really weird thing that, and this is why, again, we as the arts sector need to be thinking much more clearly about cultural policies that we tend to take on board these policies because they come with resources or they come from areas where, we kind of have some degree of respect for those things, but we need to be much more interrogative of these to understand, do these policies actually apply within the circumstances that we find ourselves in? So I think that's the first thing. I think also with regard to obviously gender politics, and that's something I referenced as well, whose gender politics prevail? Who has the political space? If we talk about collaborations internationally, in which country can we do these things if the political space is such that they don't allow for particular questions to be raised and so on? So we need to be sensitive and understand that as well. At the same time, not simply to conform and say, government doesn't allow this, therefore, sorry guys, but we're out of here. We can't be hypocritical and demand of festivals in Europe, for example, that they take a more activist position with regard to visas and making sure that people are not treated with indignity when they come to Frankfurt passport control and the like. And then we simply in our own African festivals say, well, sorry, our government says we can't do this, so we're just going to conform. We need to be activists as well and say, how do we change the things that we think are wrong in order for our festivals to give expression to the human rights values that we hold dear? Sorry, those are just two things I want to pick up for now.
Thank you. There is another side to this dialogue, actually, which is, we only have a few minutes left now, actually, just a couple of minutes, but Esther says in the chat, she says she has a problem to balance the artistic agenda with an activist agenda, and how do you do that? And she particularly asked Kirstin and Jan if they do like roundtable discussions on difficult matters like this as well, and she also talks about the hypocritical nature of presenting something really political and something that would be very dangerous in another context, but in a safe environment, in a theater in Europe, for example. So do you have any comments to end this on, Kirstin, maybe?
I think Jan already started to answer in the chat, and I also will, a short one. But what I think is coming from this Theater of the Welt Festival, knowing, and I won't name now any countries or governments, but for Stefan Schmidtke, it was quite a big issue to do a festival in a safe space like Germany, and going to the governments who would support productions that would come and naming that he wants at least 50% of the productions from a country to be from indigenous artists, for example. And this is what a part of being a good ally could be, just as an idea. That you use your power, as we do have as white privileged people from Germany and other countries, to tell other governments what we want. And it's interesting because the countries I won't name now are countries that are aware of the issues they have in their country. They have like placards on their houses saying, see, this is actually the space from indigenous people we are just using, but they don't want their indigenous artists to go to international festivals because they have others that they assume to be more important. So just as an idea.
This level of hypocrisy everywhere, really. But I think we need to finish it now. Our time is up, unfortunately. I had like 5 or 6 other questions here, and there are questions in the chat, but this is a deep dialogue, and we need to continue this deep dialogue, and we need to be brave enough to hear what's being said as well, and really, really hear it. And I think there was in quite a few, actually I think most of you spoke about making connections between festivals, between communities. And I think this is something that we really need to take with us, that we need to gather our resources, and resources in the sense that financial resources to bring art work from other continents into our countries, and for this to be, and also the power, the cultural power, where actually that's also a resource, that a string of festivals has much more cultural and financial power than a single festival. And I think this is one of the things I take away with me from this dialogue, just one tiny one from this whole wonderful discussion. Thank you very much for joining us online, and thank you Zoomers as well, and speakers, of course, last but not least. Inge wants to close this off, right?
Thank you so much, Vigdis, for facilitating this panel and all the speakers. I think it's a great discussion, and a discussion that needs to be continued. There were many questions in the chat that are still unanswered, but that's also why we have these roundtables this afternoon. So thank you for all those who followed the live stream, and we will be back with you tomorrow with the next panel on sustainability with, again, a very select group of speakers. So thank you very much. We are offline.